Welcome to the N1 Fitness Podcast. I'm your host, Marcus Sadu, and today we've got Andrew Triana on the show. So Andy is a strongman competitor and he coaches athletes in the more so elite performance realm. We dig into a ton of fascinating topics such as the circadian rhythm. We dig into SSRI, so anti-depressants, the comparison between those two and cocaine, optimizing sleep, meal timing. We also delve into the negative effects of alcohol on sleep, marijuana. We look at sleep drugs, Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, eyesight, stability, sleep tracking, shift work, and a whole bunch more. So I think you guys are really going to enjoy this episode. Now, I do want to say parts of this episode do get a little bit more technical than a lot of our other episodes, but I think you're going to be able to follow along just fine. And also, there's a little bonus at the end of the episode of where Andy and I actually were talking before we started recording. So I put that at the end of the episode just because I thought it made a little bit more sense there. But enough of me. Let's dig into this episode with Andy Triana. Andy, welcome to the show, my man. Thanks for coming on the pod.
Absolutely. My pleasure, Marcus. Thank you so much for having me on.
So for the folks who may not be familiar with you or your work, how did you get into all of this fitness, performance, and health stuff to begin with?
I kind of just fell into it out of passion. And then along the way, I discovered I had a knack for it. So I was like the obese kid growing up and just like the late bloomer, especially because I was put into private school early as a child. I grew up in a not financially affluent area, and my parents were lucky enough to put me in a private school, and they just like took me into kindergarten at like 3.5 or 4 years old, basically. Like they totally shouldn't have done it. So I was just always like a little bit behind, and I'm competitive, not in a negative way, but I just like any other organism want to be near the top of the hierarchy. So I just started learning, and I didn't like being fat. So I started losing weight, and it started coming off really quick during wrestling. And then it stalled afterwards. And that made me like unbelievably upset. So I just started learning as my method of making that change. And by the time I got to college, I was like, this is what I want to do. And that's kind of when I figured out I had a knack for it. When I was exposed to like next level material, it just came really, really easily to me. And then like, it's just been pretty much an exponential curve ever since. Like really nothing's changed as far as like the passion and like how deep I like to go.
Very cool, man. Now, speaking of passion, circadian biology and the circadian rhythm is one of my favorite topics, and it turns out to be one of yours as well. So I'm stoked to pick your brain here. When you're approaching what the circadian rhythm is, big picture, how do you typically explain it?
It's our body's recognition of what a day is. And when we're talking about biology, we're talking about sun-moon cycling. We are not talking about what they tell you the clock says or what time you need to be at work or anything like that. So those are obviously input culturally. And obviously we need those to just live in like society. However, our brain doesn't care about what weight's on the bar, what the clock says, or what your food scale says. It only cares about consistency and its response and or anticipation of those things. The reason I say anticipation is it's because if you're probably listening to the N1 podcast, you care a little bit more about maintenance, less about maintenance and more about progress. You're more concerned about what's the next step. And just in general, anytime you make that next step properly, you unlock the anticipatory advantages of performance. And we'll talk about that later, but essentially your body can be good and consistent enough that it prepares for the incoming tasks based on your circadian rhythm, which is great. So essentially, it's your body's way of determining when is appropriate for us to focus on recovery and sleep, because we are the type of mammal that needs one singular long bout of sleep for the circadian rhythm, whereas dogs do not have this type of rhythm. Dogs have a central nervous system that's very, very much predicated on acute catecholamine release, and they have a very high heart rate to facilitate that. So that's why they can just fall asleep and do nothing all day, then all of a sudden get up and go bonkers. They do not need that, but the reason we need long bouts of sleep is because of our higher brain center, learning, memory, and all those things. So this is a cost of admission for being a higher level creature in the biological realm. So if you are going to be a higher level creature from like an evolutionary perspective, you need to do things a little bit better. Ignorance is bliss very much applies here. If you have incredibly simple biology like a dog, it's very easy to get by in life because there's not much to fuck up. The danger is if you do mess up, you're dead. So veterinary drugs are far, far cleaner and safer for humans to inject than human-grade pharmaceutical drugs. Because since we have sophisticated immune systems and livers and kidney functionality and all these things to deal with metabolism, we can pretty much get away with, doing some potentially biologically dirty stuff. Think about people who are addicted to drugs. Do you think they're worried about sanitation? However, if you did that to your dog, you would pretty much immediately die. So with the sophistication of our biology and the development of this kind of two half-pronged circadian rhythm, we need to kind of understand that it's going to be a bit more complex than maybe your basic bioenergetics and exercise physiology. And that's okay. And it has to be that way because we are talking about what makes us different than basically the rest of the biological world.
Fascinating, man. Now, in regards to light and dark cycles, the general population folks are getting more and more aware of how they need to minimize bright light at night. But I think an often overlooked aspect is how we actually want bright light at the right time. So can you just explain for us what our biology expects from a light exposure standpoint over that 24-hour period?
So first off, we have to remember that all light is not created equal. For example, the moonlight is very different in our biological response than the sunlight. Even further, the sunlight after its peak in the day is a different biological connotation and response than the sunlight before its peak in the day. So it's not that it's expecting something per se, is that it's really an open sheet, and then the response to the light coming in is what's causing the change. And if you think about it that way, then you start to understand why it's so harmful to have these bright lights at night, because our body's like, okay, guys, what type of light is coming in next, and what do we do? And you're like, boom, AM sunlight with your iPhone. Here we are. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, AM sunlight. Sounds good to me, man. You know what I mean? That's the same reason why, like, you can take caffeine in the morning, and if you take too high of a dose, even though it's in the morning, you still can't sleep. It's because that half-life is still bound up, and then your 7 p.m. half-life, even though it might be 100 mgs at this point, because you started at, let's say, 300 or more, is still enough to be like, hey, we're here, So what your body's looking for optimally to go to sleep is a light that is primarily focused in the midnight blues and purples on the color spectrum. And if you're looking at the moonlight specifically, that's going to stimulate melatonin secretion in the brain, which is a tryptamine, and it's going to be paired with growth hormone secretion, specifically 22 kilodalton growth hormone. And this combination of melatonin, tryptamine-based functionality with growth hormones and a low heart rate while you sleep and the metabolic functionality of sleep allows you to build muscle, recover, and your skin suit have great restoration. What happens from a neurological perspective in sleep is totally predicated on your biomarkers, like your heart rate, your autonomics, and those things. So you can have great sleep from a skin suit perspective, but bad sleep from a neurological and learning perspective. And that's one of the biggest differences that they talk about when they say being unconscious versus true REM cycles of sleep, like why you can get super, super drunk and pass out and literally sleep all night, but wake up feeling like nothing happened, and why sometimes a 3-hour quality nap is almost better than a shitty night's sleep. So it's based on what's actually happening in the composition of that. And the reason I try to make these delineations early on is so that you look at things different. Because if you look at things different from square one, whether you realize it or not, downstream, you're going to make a different choice. So if you look at it like our body's a constant radar looking for light to respond to, you're going to just inherently be more cautious because you're like, damn, my body's going to pick up on this and make a change. It's 10:30 at night. I don't want to make this change anymore. You start to think about things differently. So then when the sunlight in the morning is happening, we're having neurotransmitters be secreted like serotonin. Serotonin gets a really, really bad rap and is easily the most misunderstood, maybe behind oxytocin as far as like neurotransmitter functionality and stuff. But serotonin, its function from a biological definition is nothing more than to protect the functionality of your habitual circadian rhythm. And then this is going to like quickly bleed into depression again. And this is why everyone's like, oh, you have serotonin-based depression, blah, 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 and you can't get out of it. It's like, well, kind of. You don't have serotonin-based depression. Your serotonin is just doing its job. You're just telling it to do a shitty job. Like, I'm sorry your serotonin's a bad guy because you treated him like shit, you know? Everyone understands this concept with cortisol. They're like, it's cortisol's fault, you're fat. And luckily people are like, no, you're an idiot. Like, it's your fault, you're fat. It's not your cortisol. Cortisol is just doing its job. You're just telling it to do negative things. Same exact paradigm with serotonin here. It's the sticking point to your habits and functionality from a circadian perspective. So if you start waking up at 1 p.m. and crying every day and then don't go to sleep until 4 a.m. and like you're on your phone at 4 a.m., if you do that enough times in a row, your serotonin's essentially going to make the adaptation to say, hey guys, like this is our sleep-wake cycle now. Like let's just stick with this. And then all of a sudden, hey, I'm stuck here and I don't know why. It's like these things happen on purpose. And that happens when the AM sun is secreted. So whether you're asleep or not, your body knows that there's light changes going on. And now you're asleep until 1 p.m. and you took the potential adaptations that happen from good quality sleep, but you did it at 10 a.m. with serotonin and a little bit of cortisol coming in from your light in your bedroom. And now all of a sudden you're essentially telling your body, this is what we want to do forever until you go through and change it. And then if you start, I'm passionate about this topic because it's been intervened in my life quite a few times, but now you start to think about it this way and you're like, oh my God, that's why they're prescribing people SSRIs and SNRIs to crack them out all day. Because if they hopefully take it in the morning, then it'll make them wake up earlier the next day and the next day and the next day. But all they're doing is making these people make deeper and deeper adaptations to their own bad habits. Like that dual-edged sword of biology in the morning goes both ways. If you wake up and kill it every morning, I promise you, you're going to have increased quality of life, and all of the benefits that go along with killing it every morning are going to become second nature and become easier. That's why all these like crazy rich douchebags that make money off like wake up at 4 a.m. and do this and that, and there's like no real science, but it works. That's why it works. They're just capitalizing on the morning is your time to form habits. You can do it at night, but it's far more difficult. That's what the morning is for. You're supposed to push your energy output and expenditure as the sun goes up to its peak and as it comes down. Once it comes down is when I tell people to start thinking and preparing for nighttime. So that means this is where you bring in adaptogens. This is where you have a hard stop on stimulants prior and all those things. Like if your schedule doesn't fit that, you can still optimize your schedule and fit this sunlight rhythm because like I said, your body is what's functioning on the sunlight rhythm, but it's our mind that cares about what time it is. And they're not mutually exclusive. As long as you're not working night shift work, you can totally master the art of both. And I have plenty of clients that do.
I'd love to go further down that SSRI route because if SSRIs are being prescribed to essentially stimulate someone during the day in order to realign their circadian rhythm, what is the advantage of using an SSRI versus something like caffeine?
It's selective. So the difference between cocaine and an SSRI is the selectivity of the receptor. Cocaine is a non-selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, and all they did was essentially modulate amphetamine and call it an SSRI and just change the connotation of it with good quality commercials and call it, a depression drug. But it's literally like like people talk about like testosterone equipoise, like, oh, they're so similar. It's like, that's cool. But what's scary is that cocaine and these drugs are really similar, So now when you start to think about that being the only difference and you see these effects, it's like, okay, well, maybe something like a modafinil or maybe like a properly done caffeine are achieving the same goal because of the habitual response. So SSRIs can have some potential for stimulating serotonin and having the opportunity to learn more in the morning. But why would you do that if you're going to do the wrong thing? Would you ever tell one of your obese clients to like spike nitrogen and carbohydrate intake acutely? It's like, no, that system isn't prepared for that. That's what I tell lean people to do to store glycogen. But because of that system that the obese person has in this scenario, it's going to act differently. So the same thing here. You're giving a drug that promotes energy, which is cool and makes sense, but promotes habit formation in a creature, in a system that has poor habits and most likely isn't ready or willing to change yet. So now I'm not against them. I'm against using them improperly like I am with everything else. So now to paint this picture clear for people who may be using them, because I definitely get this question on my Q&A a couple of times, is use it as your facilitator to get what you want done. So if you get them prescribed, let's say, and you don't have a habitual plan on what to do and a way to use it properly, maybe consider don't starting it yet. That doesn't mean wait 2 weeks to start it because you haven't made a plan yet, but get that shit right away, have a plan, and then implement it into your plan. And then once it becomes second nature, talk to your doctor about alternative long-term routes. And sometimes, depending on the doctor, if you get the vibe that they don't truly care about you, they're typically pushy because don't forget their paycheck is predicated on how many pills you re-up on every month. So just same paradigm with research. You can't get mad because they're putting food on their table. I would put food on my table too if I had to, which everybody does. And that's a whole different story. But vouch for yourself and recognize that I can't ride this out forever. Would you tell any of your clients that they could do, whatever caffeine dose they want forever? You can't do anything forever besides vitamins and minerals and vegetables.
What does the research as far as efficacy say about SSRIs specifically?
So we have to remember when we're looking at research, there's the in vitro, which is a certain type. So it's like we plug this into a cell, what's the mechanism of action, all that shit. We have the in vivo, which is we started giving this to some type of mammal, anywhere from the cow, rat, all the way up to the human spectrum to figure out what's happening. And then we have what happens in real life. And that's what I say, the phenomenology of what we all live in. So the in vitro is looking at serotonin is going to be massively upregulated because we're taking away that reuptake route. So reuptake is like recycling. It's like, okay, the metabolism of this original untouched serotonin molecule didn't really fully destroy it. We can just take a couple methyls and acetyl groups and basically resynthesize it back into the parent compound. And that only costs $5. And let's say making an entire new serotonin costs us $15. So it's like, okay, from a biological perspective, that's reasonable. But by taking away that efficiency route, it's, yes, going to upregulate how much serotonin you produce, but that costs you $15 a molecule. Let's just say roughly 3 times more. So the long-term effect, the same thing as caffeine and all ergogenic aids, anything that acutely enhances performance has a higher recovery cost. That's the point. And that's why you sleep well after good training. But it's like, okay, so if we're paying more, that automatically tells us this isn't a long-term thing. And furthermore, while we're doing this, it better be worth it. Because neurotransmitters require good sleep. You're taking a drug that has a long half-life that's going to be anti-sleep in a sense. So that's a greater plight to saying you better have your shit straight. The in vivo research is difficult to interpret because it's essentially survey-based. There's some in vivo where smaller groups, they can do half like true biology research with the what's going on in your life, are you seeing results? But those are smaller and more expensive studies. But in general, the in vivo research kind of shows good promise. But I mean, if you take a drug, don't you normally feel better? That's the point, right? So that's kind of my effort or my 2 cents on it as far as efficacy, because the cost is very high. I'm not a fan of any high-cost supplements, regardless of niche or demographic, because it's like the Spider-Man quote, with great power comes great responsibility. I don't know if that's Spider-Man. Maybe it's Superman. Whatever. regardless. But it's true. It's like, okay, this is a lot to teeter. So unless you're the person who really, really needs it, or you have such a stress-free life that you can do whatever you want and you can just worry about your own biology like all day and maintaining it and taking care of it, then you might have better efficacy. But it's very difficult for someone who has like a bang, bang, bang day, has a lot of things to take care of, a lot of responsibilities, to be given a drug that works really well and then not be told that they have to make the change and come off it soon, and then all of a sudden start getting bad side effects and say, now you have to choose between quality of life with bad side effects or quality of life of coming off the drug you're addicted to. And that's where all these people start to have not just habitual and behavioral issues, but now because you've been on this drug this whole time, now you have legitimate neurochemistry issues.
Man, that is just such a slippery slope and a tricky spot to be in, a tough decision to make.
But, the thing is, the only reason we're in this entire paradigm is because they work to a degree. And that's the real problem, is that, okay, like they're getting some results acutely, but where is it looking long term? And I think the next wave of depression research is looking more like a nootropic style drug ultimately, like focusing on like neuronal restoration and non-sympathetic or just autonomic derived neurogenesis and stuff. So truly looking at the opportunity to form habits and make life change from a neuron perspective.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So do you see anything that's super promising in your eyes on that front?
The problem when it comes to anything regarding the brain, which is the delineation I always make from the skin suit, is that it has to, and this actually ties us back to the circadian rhythm, smoothly enough, it has to have a habitual pairing, like target tissue when it comes to eating food and muscle building or fat loss. It needs a target. So you can take all the new peps you want. You can promote all the neurogenic drugs you want, but it's like, to what? What is it going to adapt to? So the same paradigm occurs with growth hormone. People talk about organ like dysplasia and hypertrophy and prostates and all this stuff. It's like, well, of course, same thing with cortisol and serotonin. You took the drug and it did its job, and you didn't have the target tissue in your muscle damage wise for it to grow. So guess what? It started growing other shit. It's doing its job. So just like in this scenario, we have to say, like, what's doing its job and why, and then how is it going to adapt to that? So that my fear is it's the same paradigm where we're not pushing habitual change enough on people. And now you're going to have neurogenesis associated with all your negative side effects that you hate,
Really interesting, man. Now, as far as chrononutrition goes, or essentially meal timing, what approach do you typically take or recommend folks take around eating patterns and how they impact or relate to sleep timing, intensity, and duration?
So it's funny. I actually don't talk about it at all with clients unless I have to, because that's my job as the coach, is to fit around your life. So in my mind, first off, it would be a disservice to be like, well, this is what biology does, so fucking figure it out. And if your life doesn't fit, you don't want it bad enough. Like that's totally a fallacy. So it's like, tell me what you have to do and complete. I'll make the biology happen on its own. So if I had to be like, if you had nothing to do all day, what would be ideal? I would love to see like 0 carb, low food volume bookends of the meal, eating within 90 minutes of waking up with the sun. I would like to see like your carbs and stress more move towards the middle of the day. And then, you figure out what you need within that. And then that way you can like sleep with a somewhat empty stomach. We don't want it too empty because we don't want to stimulate any new production of bile or enzymes or digestive processes. We don't want to draw blood to the stomach, which happens with extreme hunger and starvation and extreme fullness. So we need that perfect mid-range of digestion that's relative to you based on how much you can digest and eat before bed. And then in the morning, the reason I like lower food volume and typically lower on the carbs is because it's an opportune time to capitalize on the hormones already there to produce energy. And hopefully this happens via lipolysis, aka stored body fat. So that way you're promoting a like small daily super compensatory spike in sensitivity to carbohydrates midday. And this is actually defended by, there's actually an incredibly small window in time in every single natural and enhanced athlete where in the morning where there's a little bit of cortisol, a little bit of amino acids in your blood, whether they're liberated from proteolysis or food, a little bit of growth hormone, and a little bit of insulin endogenously. This happens in literally everybody at a certain time every morning to some degree. And it goes to show us how miraculous and powerful bioenergetics truly are in managing food and energy throughout the day. So if we're programmed from a heritable genetic standpoint to do this with our hormones, it's probably a somewhat favorable idea to follow it, not from the sense of being a naturalist that like we have to follow biology, but it's like, well, do you have a fucking better idea? It's like
Totally.
like people have gotten pretty jacked, if this has been working so well, I'm probably just going to go with it. You know what I mean? Because I'm not a naturalist. It's 2020. It's better to drive your car, take the bus, and buy your micronutrient supplementation than eat your vegetables for digestive health, pH, and satiety. Because are you really going to spend $15 a day on spinach? And then think about the digestive issues that would come along with that. Not even to mention the planning issues. How do you plan to eat 7 to 9 cups of spinach? It's like, well, I guess I'm just going to graze all day like a cow, right? How do you plan that? So like I said, it's 2020, like figure out what's reasonable. Because you know what? If you tell me that, Andy, I work from 5 a.m. to 9 a.m. like a dog in construction, I'm just going to blast you with some lean carbs and digestive aids first thing in the morning, because even though it might not be optimal for your hormones, you got to work, dude. So it's like, all right, we'll go with it, and I will deal with your parasympathetic beta oxidation later in the day, because that's what you pay me for as you coach.
Hey team, really quick pause in the action here. If you're interested in applying for one-on-one online nutritional coaching and or workout design with me, you can head on over to n1fitness.com/coaching or just click the link in the show notes below. Let's get back to it. That's a cool approach. I like that as far as not talking about chrononutrition or even concepts that people don't need to worry about unless they need to worry about them, essentially. I personally have noticed that folks that wake up in the night, if their sleep is fragmented or they're getting the night sweats, for example, we just push that last meal forward a little bit because they probably ate too late or ate too much. But I like that concept of just not addressing it if you don't need to, not overcomplicating things.
So that's for coaching, of course. If you're a consultant or a consultee, rather, you're like, hey, Andy, I want to learn about it. Obviously, I'll tell you everything. But the caveat to coaching is, like, this is why I have Alex do my nutrition. It's like, truthfully, I don't fucking care. Like, obviously I care as a coach, but it's like, I just want the results. Tell me what to do. I want to blindly do it like an athlete, There is something to be said for doing that. That's why, coaches have coaches, Like, I help Alex with stuff. Broderick helps Alex with stuff. We help Broderick with stuff. Like, it's a family thing because no one can dissociate from your athlete-coach mindset fully. Like, if you want, let's say you're trying to lean out on your own. Completely on your own, no feedback from anybody. The second you get hungry, you're going to start thinking different. I promise you. And when you make your nutrition update, you're going to try to validate through doing things that you shouldn't be doing. Everyone will. You can't escape from that. So you need some type of system where it's like task and quality of life oriented, just to give you the motivation to sustain your biology over time. You know what I mean? There's no motivation that's going to get your results over the course. Like, you can't be motivated for 3 years straight. There's going to be lulls, but I want to make 3 years worth of biological progress. So that's why these habits and stuff matter so much, because you can create a baseline level of habits and all that stuff that is so second nature that you would feel like you would die without doing it, like people's morning coffee, but you can set it up so it's just for building muscle or losing fat. So then your second nature is just goal attainment now, and you didn't even know it. And that's, the point of hiring people as a coach.
Totally, man. Now, you touched on this a little bit before. Alcohol is rough on sleep. And from my understanding, it messes with sleep architecture. We see fragmentation, lower quality. Do you know how alcohol is actually impacting our rhythm and sleep cycles themselves? Like, what are the mechanisms at play? I'm so curious.
So it's funny. It's actually conceptually the same answer that Tudka has. It's super simple, but because it's so simple and so integral to the biology, it's like, oh my God, it bleeds everywhere. No shit. Ethanol is a B vitamin antagonist systemically. So it's like, oh my God. So you think about B vitamins in your musculature, in your cardiac, in your vasculature, and your brain. It's like, oh, obviously I'm fucked. Like, it affects everything. So just think about like what B vitamins do, like cerebrally from a methyl donation and neuronal aspect, what they do when it comes to creatine and homocysteine recycling in our muscle cells, and just everywhere beyond that. Like if you're inhibiting them, like that's why people vomit. That's why people have all these deleterious effects. That's why people can't eat. It's like, okay, like I just took away like my body's cofactor system. Like, we have not many water soluble vitamins. We have a couple variations of B vitamins. We have vitamin C. We have like these things, but like, fat soluble vitamins, for example, are far more sophisticated from the sense of how they're stored, the vastness of what they do and how they function. And because they're stored over time, you can have a couple days of being messed up and you won't mess up too bad. Whereas you take alcohol, it's like, all right, yesterday's B vitamins are useless, today's B vitamins are useless, and so are tomorrow's. And that's 3 days of things that you need to refuel. Like you can't go 3 days on empty with your car. You only get one chance. And it's kind of the same thing here. So I do have some really, really cool methods for ameliorating some of the effects of ethanol, which is the alcohol that we all drink. I'm a little hesitant to give them out, which I will give them out here, but especially to give them out to like clients and stuff, because I don't want it to be the reason you go out and drink. And you're like, well, I can mask it now. But at the onset of drinking, you want to start with a fatty meal that is specifically high in omega-3s, and you want to get a good dose of B vitamins with that. When you are about to finish drinking, you want to make sure that you have no food at this point. You want to spike some water, again with B vitamins, and you want to use some type of antioxidant. My personal favorite is injectable glutathione. That's a little unrealistic, especially if you're drunk. So you could go with a curcumin. You could go with like a neurological antioxidant, like an astaxanthin. You could do a lot of different things. But regardless, water, no food, B vitamin with your antioxidant, and then just wake up in the morning again. Wake up with the sun. Make sure you get a healthy dose of a stimulant with another dose of B vitamins, and get just hydrated and nourished. And from then on, it should just be much, much better.
Is the thought process on the stimulant because you likely stayed up later that night, just get the rhythm back on track as far as timing goes, or what's the thought process around that?
No, it's actually to stimulate your circadian related catecholamines. So because you have all these depressive effects of the ethanol, when you wake up, you're not going to have the same response. So I want to start really hard the next morning on what time it is, have catecholamines, because catecholamines are also going to upregulate the need for beta oxidation. They're going to decrease the voltage dependent charge for you to urinate. So you're going to start diuretic processes earlier on. And it's more importantly, just going to make you not feel like dog shit too bad.
Gotcha. Now, so should that stimulant intake that next morning actually be higher than a typical dose that you would have on an everyday basis, or does it not matter?
It doesn't really matter, just because it's pretty, like, all stimulants are pretty dose dependent. It also doesn't matter the choice. So it doesn't have to be like a cardiac stimulant. Like it could be, like I said, like a nootropic, a modafinil, an adaptogen. Most people obviously pick caffeine because it's ubiquitous, but it's just some type of neurological stimulant. So you could even argue like choline, like anything like that.
Okay, cool, man. And then as far as electrolytes go, salt, are we worried about that at all, or just everything sorts itself out?
That's one of those things where it's like, if you're drinking, you're more than likely probably going to eat some salty foods along with it. Thanks to homeostasis, unless you're going on a bender, that stuff's mainly taken care of. The only time you would have to, and I hate to even bring this up, is if you're one of those people that's dumb enough to like starve yourself when you take drugs and alcohol. Like I totally reference alcohol as taking drugs, but like in general across anything, like if you're starving and dehydrating yourself in the hopes that you get a greater response, you're dumb for two reasons. You're dumb for risking your health, and you're dumb for not looking deeper into how biology acts. You're actually not getting a better high. You're just hyper perception wise sensitive to the change. So the drug is actually acting worse, but because you're in a hyper vigilant state from fucking starving, you think you're getting higher. And then it's like, okay, so I'm risking my health for a placebo effect. Like, why don't I just like take some max uptake with my drugs and then like have them actually be uptaken better and then get less effects because I took less total drug to get the sensation I wanted.
Very cool. Now, how about Z drugs and benzodiazepines impacting sleep? And then even more importantly, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on some of the trade-offs of taking some of these drugs.
So it's actually funny just because they're so analogous, just because of the circadian laws. Once we talk about the circadian rhythm and once you understand it more in depth from a suprachiasmatic nucleus standpoint, you start to understand that it's like, oh man, we're playing its game. It's like not responding to us. Like we're playing its rules. Like we don't make the rules here. That's why I was saying the time on the clock doesn't matter. The sunlight matters, and you can live your life however you want, but you have to abide by the sunlight rules. So it's the same thing here in the sense of the drug can work, but it has to be paired with that habitual change. So you habitually can't fall asleep if you don't know how to fall asleep and like are good at falling asleep. So that's what these drugs are great for helping you create that rhythm where it's like, oh, at 10 o'clock, we go to sleep. We're used to this now. The problem is you're only getting habitual responses from it. So you're not getting the true benefits of sleep because you're unconscious. By kind of shutting off your PC, so to speak, it's not doing the active things that happen when you're sleeping. So earlier when I said everything has a cost, like sleeping and eating, even though they're typically seen as restorative things, they have a cost. So we go through glial cell restoration, so oligodendrocytes and all these different things that have to do with glia get restored at night. That's a process that's paid through lipids typically. We have to manage our own blood glucose at night because now we're spending some type of substrate at the brain. We have to manage all these growth hormones and lipases and glucagons that are now coming into the bloodstream because we're sleeping and now have to manage that blood glucose, which is going to be depleted by our brain functioning. You see what I mean? So now when you start to realize that you're unconscious, like truly unconscious, now you're inhibiting the metabolic benefits of sleep because you're not going through those lipolytic cascades because your energy needs are essentially just your heart beating. You are not learning. You're not restoring your neurons and your explosive and memory-based cascades. And then furthermore, you're not getting any of the opportunity to wake up and know what time it is because none of those cascades happened. Our body recognizes we can only do oligodendrocyte restoration at night when we're sleeping. So if we're unconscious, we just missed out on that. So now furthermore, the next morning, you have even less of an idea what time it is. And now you start slipping into sleep paralysis. Now you start slipping into grogginess. That grogginess in the morning isn't as much of a receptor issue as much as it's because of that deep sleep. Now we think it's later in the previous night than it is. Like instead of it being 6 a.m., maybe we think it's 3 a.m., because of that melatonin or whatever it was.
Have you looked into any of the stuff on sleep drugs or just lack of sleep, poor quality sleep, and Alzheimer's and dementia? Because there was a bunch of stuff that came out as far as beta amyloid goes and these plaques building up in the brain, and it just turned out that those seem to be a response versus a causative factor in things like Alzheimer's and dementia. So what are your thoughts on that?
So it's more of a correlation. So it's more that amyloid beta plaque, AB42, gets built up in the brain, and all these similar amyloid issues get built up in the brain. And imagine them as like stopping points in the road you're trying to drive down. So the neurological road we're trying to drive down is LTP, long-term potentiation, which therefore is going to trigger memory and whatever it is, whether it's motor or cognitive and educational. You're going to have memory recall, boom, boom, boom. You just learn something. Like now you can remember how to do it better. Imagine you only have your night's sleep to do that. And, throughout that night, you have different bouts of sleep. So you don't have much time to get this shit done. Imagine there are roadblocks now. Now I have less time to get through. Now I'm late. Now we're not getting as much efficient and restorative stuff done. The reason there is a correlation issue is because Parkinson's and all those related issues to that disease are dopaminergic and neurochemistry and neurotransmitter based. Guess what time of day these things are restored? It's at night. So now it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And to kind of tie what we talked about earlier with it's as simple as for people with Parkinson's, walking in a dopaminergic true fashion. Getting out of that robotic, ameliorating white noise, because it seems to be, and there's no real science to prove this, but I think there's a greater correlation and causation between chronic white noise buildup in the brain and circadian dysregulation with amyloid plaque buildup than anything else. Because if you start to think about it extrapolating from a strictly acute to long-term factor, these things, these roadblocks and these inhibitions are building up because you're lacking restoration and you're lacking proper neurobiology in the first place because of this white noise, say a few days. You extend that over time, make it habitual, more and more builds up, and now you're past the point of potentially self-repairing or easily auto-regulating it because it's become chronic enough that it's real. And now you have enough built up that now you have more chronic long-term side effects that you didn't have when you started.
What do you mean by white noise?
So white noise is like neuronal misfiring. So for example, when you're focused, so it's really, really easy to understand if you're an athlete. So if you've ever walked into the gym and you see people squatting in the squat rack and you see someone that is making eye contact with X and it looks like they're looking right through it and they're almost not even on this planet, if we were to look at their brain and their neuronal firing compared to other neurons, the neurons associated with their squat would be red hot and firing, and pretty much the neurons associated with everything else would be pretty off or quiet. And that's focus. So it's logically the things I want turned on are turned on, and we have insight into that based on their eyes and vision. Now you look at the guy next to him or the girl next to him, and they're looking around like crazy, and their squat looks wobbly, and they clearly aren't expressing the strength the same way that they may fully be capable of. And now we look at their brain and neuronal activation, and the squat pattern's like a light orange, but then there's also like their linguistics and auditory area because they're listening to music that they're too in tune with and not focused on enough. And they're also thinking about something someone said earlier, and then their phone's ringing. So all this stuff is going on, and it's like white noise on your TV. You can't focus on the task or what's at hand because we have all this neuronal misfiring. And this is actually one of the primary and predatory causes of or unhealthy sleep hygiene. It's you're trying to get in bed with all these crazy neurons firing that have to do with different areas of your brain, different times of day, different activities. And how are you supposed to sleep when our body's trying to actively be vigilant towards 3 or 4 or 5, 6 different things you're thinking about?
So you're saying don't hop on Twitter and Instagram right before you try to go to sleep, basically.
Oh, yeah. That's one of my biggest pet peeves.
With that white noise sort of paradigm and lack of focus, essentially, would you say that practicing the art of attention itself would actually benefit or put you in a better position to stave off neurodegeneration itself?
Absolutely. It's literally been shown that you need nothing more than a mild emotional attachment to cognitive stimulation is all you need to prevent the onset of Alzheimer's, Parkinson-like symptoms. It won't stop them. It will retard them once they have onset, but it just stops the onset of them in the first place. So this is my biggest pet peeve. Because I was also in the teaching world world for a little bit. I was a permanent sub at a special school in the special education department of Hartford, Connecticut. For a while, and I was also bouncing around at a couple different schools beforehand. So I saw a lot of what modern day students and teaching is like, and the teachers don't even have an attention span. So how can we expect this of the students? So it's more of, you just teach these things early on, we might not have to worry about it, but that's absolutely true. The art of mindfulness, the art of focus is the foundation for making change, not just in your whole life, but specifically quality of sleep and mood-based disorders. So just one more example to let people be really clear on what white noise is. Imagine you're just going on a calm walk with your dog. I do this every morning upon waking up. And I actually call this my worry time. I do a sunrise walk, and my worry time is, okay, what shit can potentially stress me out today? How do I deal with it? What is it? How do I line it up in my head? How am I going to attack it? And furthermore, ask the question, should I really even be stressed about this? So it's kind of attacking those things early on. That's a small thing I do. But I notice when I have a lot of white noise in my head, not only can I not think about that, I'm just like kind of out of tune with what's around me. I don't notice the nature. You're walking and like you feel like your heart rate's kind of fast and like you're even like a little aggressive. You're mad for no reason. What the hell is that guy driving about? Stupid idiot driving, like whatever, like for no reason, And then being free of that white noise on the same walk is just walking and being like, wow, it's quiet. I can hear the silence. I can notice things. I can notice like, oh, how far away that other dog is. I'm just at peace in the moment. And even though it's the same exact scenario, and from the outside looking in, it's exactly the same, what's going on between your ears is drastically different, and it really does matter.
This is sort of a bit of a side tangent, but it ties in with the circadian rhythm just because of the eyes. Like we have these structures in our eyes that are not involved in vision. They're only involved in detecting light. But then you going on your morning walk with your dog and having different distances to look at versus just inside your house at your computer or whatever would actually be exercising your eyes in a way that is super beneficial for essentially your vision.
Totally. I love the whole vision stuff. I'm a huge promoter of it. So our eyes are the gateway to the nervous system and the sensation systems. So you have to think about it just from a simple conceptual and philosophical perspective. They have to be the gateways to those things because that's how we take our input from the screen in front of us. So it turns out that the most important thing in vision in general is your opportunity to have passive peripheral vision. If you can passively and safely take in information from your periphery due to having low amounts of white noise, you can then focus on your focal vision very well.
Yeah, and that's actually a really underrated aspect of athleticism, I think. It's vision.
What were we just saying about the athletes and squatting? Now we're looking at it from a different lens of vision and saying the reason your knees are wobbling on your squat is because your eyes are everywhere and not focused. Because now you're looking here and you're getting sensation and mechanoreceptor feedback from the far left. Now you're looking over here and you're getting sensation and mechanoreceptor feedback from the far right. So obviously your knees are wobbling because it's trying to respond appropriately to everything in front of you with load on your back. The reason from a phenomenological perspective and legitimate neurochemistry and neuroscience perspective, you need to be in that Zen flow state is A, because the shit on your back is heavy and you don't want to get hurt. You don't want to mess this up. But more importantly, if nothing exists in the world around you, you have you have horse blinders on. You have nothing to mess up or give you any stimuli that's unexpected that could potentially ruin your mechanoreceptor feedback.
That's fascinating, man. Now, as far as marijuana goes, how is that impacting sleep potentially in a different way than things like the benzos, the Z drugs, the alcohol?
So it's not going to induce that unconscious effect the same way. However, it's still going to negate REM sleep and deep sleep because of the peripheral activation of different cognitive areas. So the reason it's a better trade-off is because, all right, well, I'm still getting the lipolytic benefits, the learning benefits to a degree, but getting less, and the actual deep sleep and motivation benefits of it, you might not be getting the optimal learning benefits, but you're at least sleeping better than you would be without it if you need the help in the first place, and you're still able to get most of, if not all, the benefits. The nice thing is it does seem to attenuate your need to wake up in the middle of the night. So it's a potentially very valid application for the right type of sleep issue. And the reason I phrase it that way is because your thing is weight loss with people, and you know this very well. Not every weight loss case is the same. You might need to lose weight by increasing food first. You might just need to stop eating garbage, and you might need to decrease before we increase. Even though all these people are losing body fat, there are different avenues and things you need to address based on that to get results in a linear direction. So that's really what we're looking at.
Got it. Now, when it comes to sleep measurement, tracking, all that sort of stuff, are you using an Oura ring? Are you using heart rate? Are you just subjectively seeing how you feel in the morning, or all of the above? How do you look at that stuff?
Totally depends on the person. So, for example, if you're someone like me where although you work a lot during the day, I can set my own circadian rhythm. I don't track my sleep because it's been good enough, consistent enough for long enough, and I'm clearly getting the blood glucose benefits and everything I need from it. I don't really need to track it because I just don't really want to, and I don't have a specific need for it at the moment. However, any of my athletes who wear a CPAP, we totally track sleep. You know, if you're a shift worker, if you just wake up at different times every day, I would track your sleep. It's more about tracking what you need for you. So for me, I'm a heart rate guy and an autonomics guy. So I track my autonomics because that's where I have dysregulation. We don't want to create an environment where it's good, quote unquote, from a connotation perspective, to be like death by over analytics, because then how do you make true decisions? And I've done that before where I was tracking everything and I didn't feel strong unless I had data that was good, when in reality, no one is going to ask you if you feel strong if they rob you on the street. You're going to have to respond. And although it's an extreme scenario, it's a plight for catecholamines can be released in 0.0001 seconds. So you might still be able to do what you need to do today. It's more important to think about your second, third order actions. For the people who do track their sleep, unless you like, if you're not willing to, we'll go in like an order. If you're not willing to pay for anything fancy, check your pre-bed heart rate and your AM heart rate around your sleep, just to see what it is. We'll do the difference, see if they're around the same and in a low enough margin. The next implementation would be tracking during your sleep. So the Whoop is good. It seems pretty entry level. The price is decent. The Omega Wave is great. But basically, we're looking for what's your heart rate and temperature like while you're sleeping, ideally? What's the composition of your sleep? How much time are you getting in stage 1, 2, 3, deep, etc.? And when are you waking up? So waking up at different times during the night signify different things. If you wake up right away, you either just straight up went to bed at the wrong time, or you just got in bed and you weren't ready for bed. You were worried about X or whatever. You just got in bed at the wrong time. If you wake up within hours 3 to 4 of sleep, it typically has to do with heart rate or temperature, due to food in the gut, due to arousal, or due to your resting level of autonomics. So if you wake up and go to bed at a normal time and you're waking up around like the 12 to 1, 2 a.m., that means your baseline physiology is just trash, or you ate too much before bed, either or. And then lastly, if you're waking up around like the 3 to 5 a.m. range or in the final 75% of your night, then it's more likely either some type of kidney, water, or downstream neurological issue, or it means you took drugs to fall asleep. And then if you wake up at the crack of dawn, there's nothing you can do about it. You have a very sensitive circadian rhythm, and you're probably a decent plentiful sex hormone individual, whether you're natural or enhanced, and there's nothing you could do about it.
What does your stimulant intake look like?
Pretty much zero. So you might know this about me, but I'm on the ASD spectrum. So that combined with stimulants, I think I have some type of natural, either like enzyme downregulation or something, because even like 1 to 2 milligrams per kilo of caffeine has a pretty decent effect on me. So I actually do almost none. Like at my peak, I'll do like a coffee every day.
Now, have you noticed since you've been paying more attention to your circadian rhythm, you've been getting light and dark cycles, all at the right times, and your sleep has gotten better, that your sensitivity to caffeine has actually increased or decreased? Has that changed at all, or has it always been the same?
So my tolerance to caffeine has increased. My sensitivity has gotten relatively the same, if not better. So what that means is I get less negative side effects, but it hits me just as hard, if that makes sense.
Oh, that's perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, really interesting. Now,
so
moving on
to kind of expand on that, the opposite is those people that take caffeine and just get tired faster. Those are people that have poor circadian rhythms and probably poor livers too. And because of that, they're metabolizing the same drug, but getting totally different effects.
Okay, cool. I'm glad you mentioned that too then, because shift work, and I'm in the process of sort of transitioning one of my clients out of some serious sleep debt. So we just scaled back the afternoon caffeine. She's now back in touch with how tired she actually has been over the last few years working shift work. She's in film. So when you hear about folks that are working shift work or just have caffeine and then hit the hay right away, like, are there any red flags going off in your brain as far as what to address or look at?
Oh, there's like 15 of them.
Okay, so what are you looking at first? Because same.
So the first thing I ask, and it's funny, it's the same question I ask biologically, but I ask the human is, how'd you get here, man? Because it's obviously not something that manifests easily. So it's like, okay. So then I ask, why are you taking this drug? And typically when it comes to caffeine, they say energy. And when I'm asking about energy, I'm like, well, do you want physical energy, like to run around like a small child? Or are you looking for cognition and productivity and just to not feel like you're groggy and sleeping? And it's typically the latter. And then I inform them that, due to caffeine's mechanism of action, you're actually taking this for a side effect, not a primary effect. The primary effect of caffeine is a cardiac stimulant via catecholamine releases through cyclic AMP. You're taking this for the side effect of those things. So it's not that you're necessarily, misusing it. You're just using it incorrectly from a perception standpoint. You're not abusing it. You're just like not have access to the proper tool. So once I inform them about that, I basically just take it off and try to start the right habits. And it kind of resonates about what you said earlier. Like, imagine if you told someone like, hey man, taking caffeine before bed has ruined all your learning mechanisms for the last 8 months. Like, you can't tell someone that. So it's like, okay, we'll just make the change and kind of let things work themselves out.
Okay, got it. Now, before we get to where folks can find out more about you, Andy, is there anything around the circadian rhythm, sleep, any topic we touched on today that you'd like to leave the listeners with if we missed it by chance?
Honestly, it's just like that synergy between supplement and habit. And again, saying we're in 2020, it's cheap and easy to do both of those things. It improves your quality of life, and it means that you get adaptation from it as well. I think the big thing people miss out on is they're taking a drug for the instant gratification, and they're failing to ask the question is, can this get me better in the future as well? So caffeine doesn't really have that opportunity. It's a pure ergogenic aid in the sense of instant gratification only. But now we talk about something like a modafinil or a Noopept, and not only are you getting that instant gratification, you're also getting chronic long-term benefit. So even when you stop the usage of this supplement and go back to your baseline, you're going to need even less caffeine than you needed originally because of these chronic changes I made or chose to make by these supplements. So there's always a supplement and a habit combination to go with for you to get the results you really want.
Amazing, man. Where can folks find you online, your socials, all that good stuff?
So not too many places. I try to keep it concise. ThePerformanceVibe.com is the one-stop shop for everything. I'm on Instagram as Triana and The Performance Vibe, as well as Allostatic Labs.
Amazing, man. I'll link to all that stuff in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining me. I really enjoyed that chat.
It's been a pleasure. It was a great one. We'll have to make sure to do another one as well.
I hope you guys enjoyed the base of that episode with Andrew Triana. Now let's dig into a little bit of the bonus, the pre-recorded stuff before we dug into the meat and potatoes of the episode.
I try to look at what's biology, thinking, and viewing lens like, and how is that separate, and this is my favorite time to bring it up with the circadian rhythm when we get into stuff, from what we predispose into the culture. Mm-hmm. So, for example, when it comes to time, our biological clock, so to speak, and the term clock is actually accurate because we have time clock, protein genes, and factors, and all these stuff. And that's literally, for lack of a better term, just what they're called. But, all of these things have their own lens, and it's based on the sun. It's not based on the clock or your alarm clock or anything where someone tells you that you're late or this is where the second half of your day is. That might be what society tells you is a part of your day. But for example, if your brain doesn't have at least a micro amount of growth hormone secretion at night via sleep, and a micro amount, like I'm saying, the criterion amount is very low, of that cortisol stimulation in the morning, your brain has no idea what time it is. And I think this is the greater effect and way to ameliorate depressive side effects and mood-like disorders more so than anything else. Because if we look at what the root side effects are in all these issues, whether they're just behavioral or truly mood and clinical based, they're based on autonomic dysregulation and they're based on extreme biological dysregulation. You could even throw IBS in there. And they all have a mindfulness aspect where the person with the deleterious effects, participant, whatever you want to call it, they're all experiencing this dissociation from their own body awareness and from what they think is healthy and normal. So, for example, talk to someone with severe IBS, and they think vomiting and extreme stomach pain is normal, and they've accepted that. You know what I mean? And that's something that you very much have to take into account when now you're trying to give this person advice, because they've accepted this, things like pain, things like the glucocorticoid responses and neurological responses that go along with it are a part of that circadian rhythm. And now maybe if this happens at night, you're stimulating and combating something that's giving off signals that say it's the middle of the day or the morning. And now it's very understandable as to why this becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy that a lot of people can't get out of.
Oh, man. 100%. So interesting that you say that accepting factor, because I was just talking about this with a client yesterday, because she came to me and she had some colitis stuff going on, severe IBS, and she was having like 10 bouts of diarrhea a day. And that to her was normal. So I have weekly questions, and she had said, the question was like, what's your digestion like? And she's like, pretty good. And I'm like, I need you to be way more specific, because pretty good for you is like, that could be down to 5 bouts. You know what I mean? It's so relative.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's just like something I really appreciated more than ever after finishing Norman Doidge's series of books, The Brain That Changes Itself and The Brain's Way of Healing. Because especially at the end of The Brain's Way of Healing, when we start talking about Parkinson's and all these like substantia nigra based issues, you start to realize that acceptance is the key aspect in fixing everything. And the reason in general we learn from disease physiology is because it's the group that has the most to gain from the least intervention. So you can start to see if your ideas are on the right track and novel. And furthermore, you start to realize what does and doesn't make a difference outside of bias because of that. So you start to realize that with these people, start to accept in a negative light that their condition is a part of them, who they are. These labels that we attach ourselves to happen in every niche. When you accept it in a negative light, it literally makes every drug useless, and all their conditions do is get worse. Conversely, when people accept the fact that it's in their hands to potentially get better, and they're like, wait a minute, you're telling me that all I can do is walk and the drug I take is going to work better, and I can just drink this glass of water without shaking and take pictures of my family? When you accept it in that light, it's a very, very different medication now, because now we see results, quality of life increases, and that same self-fulfilling prophecy starts to manifest in a totally biphasic direction. direction. So acceptance, more than ever with me, my clients, and how I see things, has become this dual-edged sword. And you really have to understand who you are as a person, how your psyche is, to use it properly. Because if you're someone like me who's naturally excitable and just very passionate, my dual-edged sword on the acceptance for the negative end is I kind of say yes to everything. And I will run myself into the ground and not realize it until it's too late. So I have to recognize that and act and behave accordingly. So if you're dealing with, Alex handles my nutrition. When Alex handles my nutrition, I tell him something like, man, I'm really trashed, like you said. He takes that very seriously because the only time I say that, I'm usually hurt. With that bouts of diarrhea, it's the same thing. My digestion's pretty good, but when you're talking relative to 10, pretty good could even be 8, it's a 20% decrease, So you really need to make that such a integral part of your prescriptions, no matter what it is. And that's why I'm a huge fan of having introspective feedback to go along with your biometric feedback. So I have all my athletes, clients, and to a degree consultees fill out 2 different types of feedback and 2 totally different mindsets. I have them do an introspective log where I ask leading questions that require you to think and ask about where are you heading in a philosophical and phenomenological perspective. Are you doing things that make you feel good? Are you getting the reward from the stress that you're expending, etc.? And then I have them fill out the total opposite. Short phrase, quantitative feedback. I want numbers, I want exact compliance ratios, and those types of things. So then I can much more accurately say, for you, a 70 blood glucose is maybe not as sensitive because normally we see you in the 50s or 60s, at certain periods of time, at certain things in your life. And conversely, if you're resting in the 90s and 100s and I see a 70, that means good things. And it's all relative to how you feel. So you can get good biometric feedback and feel like shit. And that's oftentimes the case in the performance world when adaptation is at the forefront of everything. And I think that's a lot of reason that people are leaving results on the table because they automatically think that progress is good. And I think that's why Alex and I speak so much about the cost of things, because even good digestion has a cost. Sleep has a cost. Everything, just like taxes, you can't fucking escape it. Everything has some type of cost. So you have to recognize that and then ask yourself, where is this from a composition standpoint impacting me?
That's an interesting concept. I mean, as far as you separating out the more philosophical questions from the more data-driven questions, are you separating those out into 2 completely separate sets because you don't want people going back and forth between those brain states? Or is that why you don't weave it all in together? What's the thought process there?
It's exactly that, So when I'm asking you about your introspective log, I'm not just talking about in the gym. I'm talking about out of the gym, your social relationships. And I want that whole thing to flow. So I send a sample for each and you use a totally different tone. And it's almost like a totally different homework assignment, so to speak. So this is your math homework. This is your English homework. So you're doing this all in a certain tone and mindset and you're thinking a certain way. And it's totally separate. Because if I ask you about why did you pick your pre-workout meal this week? And you tell me I chose cereal because I'm really, really sore and I just wanted a little pick-me-up of some sort to make me feel better. And then you start talking about your blood glucose. Now you might automatically interject man, was my blood glucose high because I ate a sugary cereal? And you start thinking maybe negatively about something that you were trying to get positive satisfaction from, when in reality, your blood glucose was high because you were sore. And that's the point of eating the cereal in that scenario. So you might just shoot yourself in the foot by proxy because we aren't separating things we should be separating.
That's it for today, guys. I'm sure you enjoyed that episode with Andy. Absolute wealth of knowledge. Now, Andy might be on in the future. We talked about putting a future podcast episode together. So if you'd like to see that, hit me up. Let me know. Also, if you're interested in applying for one-on-one online nutritional coaching and or workout design with me, you can head over to n1fitness.com/coaching or click the link in the show notes below. Follow me on Instagram at N1Fitness and friend me up on Facebook at Marcus Sadu. Thanks so much for listening, guys, and I will catch you on the next episode. See ya.